in Alexandria. They put us in an old opera house. It was the most beautiful place. It was a big domed opera house. We were there in the afternoon and we did our sound check, and we didn't really, you don't know what to expect. And then the audience arrived and the place was rammed. They were so enthusiastic. They just loved it. And at the end, they all stood up. The whole of this huge auditorium stood up and they were all clapping.
I had such a great time connecting with today's guest. It was so cool to hear about her career and everything she's done in the music world and get into her music. And I just admire what she does so much. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. And we are speaking today with Alison Rayner, the British bassist who has done so many incredible things throughout her career. We talk about her latest release with her quintet, Short Stories, which has been getting all sorts of critical acclaim. Check out the reviews on her website, AlisonRayner.com. But we dig into all kinds of things. It was a really just human and beautiful conversation, talking, of course, about the pandemic. How can you not talk about that and how it's affected certainly her plans, the quintet's plans, but also, she got out and played some outdoor gigs right before we had this conversation. So we talked about what that experience was like and also just how the British jazz scene has changed over the years, her London partnership, Blow the Fuse, many more topics. I had such a blast. Definitely follow her on YouTube, Facebook, check out the new album. That's all linked up in the show notes. And a quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, Practisma, and Modacity. More on them later, but let's dive into this conversation with Alison Rayner. Thank you so much for taking time to chat. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I was sitting earlier listening to your interview with Gary Peacock.
Oh yeah,
which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Well, that was one of those. I mean, I feel so fortunate to connect with anybody, but especially somebody like Gary, who, and then of course, like the theme of your latest album, people who have left us. It's just so sad, and that was one of those really cool moments since you listen to it, where like I connecting with somebody like Gary. Sometimes I reach out to people on Facebook or other platforms and just say, "What do you want me to cover?" Because my background, I play a little jazz. I can navigate my way around some rhythm changes, but it's really not my world. And so I people who are more steeped in that world, they often have more interesting, they think about things I might not. And so that was just such a fun kind of melding of like what others wanted me to cover with Gary, and what an interesting person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved a lot of the things he talked about. I was listening going, yes, exactly. Talking about singing and, sort of feeling the music inside, and you have to sing something before you can play it. And that's exactly how I feel about it as well. So I was just kind of going, oh, exactly, lovely. It's just great. He has such a lovely approach.
Yeah, no, it was such a beautiful approach, and his path is great. And I'm just so glad to connect with you. Before this global pandemic shut everything down, I had on my docket a more extended trip to the UK and just to explore. Typically, we'll see going forward, but typically I like to do these live, and I've actually been going to different areas of both the US where I live and internationally, and just bringing my microphones and connecting with people. So hopefully we can do a round 2 sometime in person.
That would be very nice, wouldn't it? That would be lovely.
Yeah. And I've just really enjoyed digging into your music, and congratulations on everything you've done, but what a cool album and great accolades. And it's just such a cool project.
I think I would say I think I've been very fortunate in many ways, because I have a lovely band to play with, both in terms of their musicality. They're all extremely musical. They contribute such a lot to the music. They're innovative and they're creative. And everybody in the group seems to just want to work for the music. Everybody wants the same thing. So although it's my band and it's my name, I feel like I'm really supported. When we work on tunes in rehearsal, they're right there. They put themselves into it, and they come up with ideas sometimes. Or what about if we tried this? I think we could hear that tune again, or why don't we extend that section? Or that could be a really good part. We could solo over those changes. They have all kinds of ideas. And so we can discuss things together. And so it feels very nice and actually quite collaborative in the end, which is great. And they're always willing to try things out. And sometimes I've written things and I think, oh my God, is this going to be just a bit of a roast? And no, they're always, always up for it, which is lovely. So I've been very fortunate with that. And I think I've come to, I think everything I've done in my life, I've done a bit late, and I suppose there's a downside to that in the sense that you feel you haven't got so long ahead. If you're in your 20s, you've got, well, hopefully, none of us know, but we hope we've got our whole lives ahead of it, and I'm a lot older than that now. But perhaps also there are some great things about being older in that you've got, well, hopefully you've got some experience, you've learned a few things. And so I feel very fortunate to have had some very nice appreciation of the album. Well, I've done 3 albums, and each album, you always worry when you record an album. And my first album, I had really no expectations. I just thought, I really want to record an album with my own band. And some of the pieces were pieces I'd written over a period of years. But then, things just kind of, they were quite fluid, and it kind of carried on. Then we did a second album, then we done the third. And each album has had more, better reviews, and then we've won a couple of awards. And then I was really fortunate. I won one of the pieces on the new album. I won an Ivor Novello Award last year, which was just amazing. I mean, when I got nominated, that was such a big deal for me, Anyway,
yeah, no,
so that's the sort of.
It's super cool, and it was great to read about that, and I love this album, and I'm looking forward to digging into more broadly into what you've done. When was the first album? What year did you do that first solo?
The first, I actually brought them down here, so I made sure I had them in front of me so I'd remember. Okay, so the first album was 2014, and that's this one, and it's called August. And this was where I played in, I've had a reasonable, pretty nice career playing bass in other people's bands, and I've written for other people and had stuff recorded in other people's albums. But I'd always had in the back of my mind, one of these days I'll get my own group together and I'll record my own, my pieces, do an album. And you know how it keeps getting put to the back and you never get on with it. And then I had a significant birthday and I thought, oh my God, well, when am I going to do this? Because if you leave it forever, you never know what's going to happen. You might never do it. So that's when I did it. And we actually recorded it live. I didn't have a lot of money at the time. So it was a reasonably inexpensive way of doing it. And that had tunes on it. Some were written for the album at the time, and some had been written over a period of years before. Some I'd recorded with other people's bands, but I wanted to do them with my own sound. And then following that, we had 2 years later, 2016, brought this one out, Magic Life. And this had a kind of a theme to it too. And the pieces for this were written in that kind of 18-month interim. And then we had this one, which is the new one, which I think you know a bit about. Yeah, so it's, you start out and you don't think, when I started out with this band, I had no expectations of necessarily doing more than one album, but it's just kind of gone like that, which is great. Trouble is, at the moment, with what's happened the last few months, we have no idea at all what's going to follow. I imagine it's the same for you guys. Is it?
I think the UK and the US are kind of in the same boat. It sounds like you might be a bit ahead of us in terms of things reopening. I don't know. Things are absolutely 100% not open here in San Francisco. The SF Jazz, our main jazz venue, there's no word of anything happening. The San Francisco Symphony, I haven't heard one peep from. So, but I do take a little bit of heart. I was chatting with a former student of mine who's is in Germany, playing in an orchestra in Germany, and they've started rehearsals, they're starting concerts, and so reduced capacity, but it's at least nice to know that somewhere in the world, live music is showing signs. Yeah.
It's starting. I saw something the other day. I mean, to my knowledge, the music and theatre are the last to come in. I mean, there are some other things happening, but not music, nothing like, no live performance indoors. But I saw that the Barbican, which is one of our concert halls in London, is starting to do something during this autumn. I think they were advertising something for November, and I imagine that will be reduced capacity. Maybe they'll do some online streaming as well. I'm not quite sure what they've got in mind, but something is starting. I'm really hoping it does, because I had a massive amount of work cancelled we were kind of in the middle of this tour promoting this album, and then everything stopped. And all the dates from, like, we had some more dates in April, May, June. They've been rescheduled into next year, and I'm just hoping that it gets going in time for so we can have some spring and early summer dates. But we just don't know. Everything's unknown.
There are so many things to think about when you're practicing. Where do you even begin? Here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what to prioritize in your practicing.
First things first, you got to measure time. Time is of the essence. You want to get the highest return on your time investment. And the way to do that is through listening to yourself and self-recording. Almost everybody who reads the blogs of Rob Knopper, Noah Kageyama, everybody knows self-recording is absolutely essential. So we put it front and center along with time. Recording
yourself, measuring the time you've spent on particular sections, and so many other things are available in Modacity. I love this app so much. You can learn more at modacity.co. And if you visit our website, we've got a special offer for lifetime access to the app. Check it out. You'll love it. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the things that is a very intentional decision, but also a little perplexing if you're coming from other pieces of software, is that when you start, there's no time signature. It's just a single quarter rest. That opens the door for so much creativity. And here is Daniel Spreadbury, Senior Product Manager of Dorico, on why they made that design decision.
We really wanted to make it clear that when you start a piece of music in Dorico, it's really like starting from a blank piece of paper, no matter how true that really is in Sibelius and Finale, because of course you can change all those things, sometimes at a cost. If you've already written some music in Finale and then you change the time signature, you can have a lot of ties and all sorts of other stuff to clean up, which you won't have in Dorico. But it's just that kind of hopefully inviting. I mean, some people might say, oh, it's a bit daunting. There's literally nothing there but 1 quarter rest. I've got to decide everything. But yes, you do. You're the creative person. You do have to decide everything.
This is one of the many design decisions that I think is totally brilliant in Dorico. It has opened the door for my own personal creativity, and it's such a beautiful product. I can't say enough good things about it. I use it every single day. There is a free version, Dorico SE, that gives you practically all the options that the full version of Dorico gives you, up to 2 stabs. So if you're doing bass duets or any kind of duets like that or exercises, that's more than enough. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Yeah, I know. What? How have you been? I'm interested in, like, how have you been passing the time? Because it's been so hard for me. You know, 6 months we're going on now, and I'm just staring out this same window that I've been staring out for the past 6 months. And I do many things playing as a component, so that's gone, but not even the majority. I'm sure that's a much bigger piece of your pie typically. So what have you been writing? Have you been curled up in a ball with anxiety? I know I have for some of the time.
A bit more like that, a bit more that than the one before.
Okay.
Do you know, when it started, I said to myself, well, I think initially, of course, we had no idea what was going to happen. And I think I probably thought, oh, they might close things down for a few weeks. And when we started to have gigs cancelled this is in March, gigs were being cancelled in May and June. I remember the drummer in my band, he said, why are they cancelling things in June? We know it could all be fine by then. Oh, if only. I think initially we thought it would be a short period. And I thought to myself, right, well, I'll just get down to doing some writing. And then as everything sort of, it became it's better here now. I think people's spirits are a little better here now. But I would say for at least a month or maybe 2 months, people were very, very stressed, anxious, depressed, and of course it affected all of us. And I felt really all over the place, I was practically on the curling up in a little ball thing. And I haven't done any writing. And then then I had an injury to my hand. I've somehow damaged my thumb. I don't know if it was connected. Maybe was it an emotional response, or was it? You know how sometimes physical and emotional things are so connected, aren't they? And it's quite painful. I'm still trying to. I've been having some osteopathic treatment, but I'm trying to get to see a really good hand specialist. And funny enough, I heard the bit on the interview with Gary where he'd damaged his hand on a concert tour with Keith Tippett and not Keith Tippett.
Oh, was it Keith Jarrett? Was that the
Keith Jarrett?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Get my Keiths mixed up. Piano players. Yeah, Keith Jarrett, and they managed to change the concert a bit, the keys and stuff, so he could still play. That was great. Yeah, but it's quite painful. I've been able to play bass guitar okay at the moment, but the double bass is really painful. So, but I don't know if it was, almost like, was it to do with playing a lot less? Was it to do with being stressed? I'm not even sure. Anyway.
Yeah, the physical thing is so weird when things happen. I've been fortunate in that I haven't really gone through anything major, but I like to say it's just because I haven't worked hard enough on the instrument to have to. But I've talked to a lot of musicians who have gone through something, and it's for most people the cause is very mysterious and the cure is very mysterious. And it's just like what you're saying. Sometimes it seems like it can be emotional, or it can be tied up, or it might be related to your instrument or not, or maybe you have a lot of things going on, or so, and it's so tough. So I hope you navigate through that. It's great to know that you can still play bass guitar, and I'm sure it'll work itself out. But that's another added stress, I'm sure, to everything else that's happening.
I know. So we'll have to see. I've been getting together. Just in the last few weeks, I've been getting together with a few friends, just in the odd little small rehearsal, and maybe playing a few jazz standards. And we've actually did some live playing the last 2 Sundays, just on the street in a market. I was and just for kind of donations and stuff. I was kind of laughing about this, thinking how earlier in the year, when we were in the middle of the tour, we'd had some great press. I'd had some good radio interviews. We'd got some awards. It was all going really well. And I was thinking, right, now this year, I need to get more work in Europe. I need to get some bigger festivals. That thing you're thinking, I need to get on to the next level. and here, now I'm extremely happy to play on a Sunday morning in a market, play some jazz standards. And people here are desperate for live music. So loads of people have turned up. The first week it went down really well. The second week people knew about it and a whole big crowd of people came. And we're going again this Sunday because the weather is still nice. So, wow. And that's lifted our spirits a lot. So I'm just playing bass guitar there, and we're just playing jazz standards, and it's such fun. You've kind of gone back to something. You've got so little that it all feels lovely. Just doing a little something feels great.
Oh, yeah, I know. I never realized how much I took live performance, whether I'm playing or watching, for granted. But I tell you, I am not, and I think probably everybody feels the same way. I am not taking anything for granted. I'm so appreciative, and I would love to be there on the street listening to you play nobody's even doing any playing here in San Francisco, which seems ridiculous because the weather is fine. I mean, there's one street performer, the wonderful guitarist that I love seeing, and every time I throw some decent change in his thing and listen for a while. And the only live music other than him that I hear this is a very San Francisco thing, but there's this guy with an accordion who just wanders the streets, walks by our place here playing "Oh What a Wonderful World" wearing a mask. Which is very, very apocalyptic, so it's appropriate for the times, and also very San Francisco. So, but that's great. How it must be amazing to play for live humans again. I mean, after that, what I'm guessing is an interval of many months, right? These are probably your first
6
live.
Months.
Yeah. Wow.
6 months. My last gig was on March the 14th. We did 3 nights of the tour with Ark, my band. really great, but we knew there was something coming. It was all feeling a bit weird, and we'd only a couple of weeks before done we'd done an album launch at the Pizza Express in town in the centre of London. Really lovely gigs, good crowds. It felt like we were really on a roll, but then it was sounding like things were starting to get a bit weird. And then just stopped like that. Yeah, when we played the other week. Yeah, I think, playing to live people, it was like, yes, this is what we do. This is what we do. And it's all about the communication. And you can see from the people listening that it means such a lot to them. We got a lot of comments, a lot of emails and stuff after saying, so wonderful to hear some live music again. I think people are desperate. It's probably the same with you.
Yeah. I mean, if we zoom out from this current moment, I'm really fascinated to see what, I'm going to be at all the concerts I can be at, after this happens. And I just think about how I took just things for granted. Like my wife and I go to the San Francisco Symphony. Oh, great. We're going to go see, or I get a call to play a week, or I get called to do X, Y, Z. Yeah, sure. That's fine. I mean, I enjoy it, but boy, when that's taken away from you, it's incredible.
It's made us really look at what to appreciate and what things are important, hasn't it?
Well, and it's interesting. I was talking with a bassist here in the States named Susan Cahill. She does many things. She's in the Colorado Symphony in Denver, Colorado, which is a great orchestra, but she also plays jazz. She's a composer. She does many things. And we were talking maybe 3-4 months ago, so so we didn't know how long this was going to extend, but she was saying she was already focusing on her small ensembles, because her line, which I think is so true, is live music will come back, but probably the small groups are going to the quartets, the quintets, playing to crowds of maybe dozens or maybe a couple hundred tops. Who knows when the 100-piece symphony orchestra with 2,500 people in the crowd, that's probably going to be one of the last things to come back. So in a way, it'll be interesting to see as things reboot and get going again. I would imagine that opportunities for your quintet will probably come a lot sooner than opportunities for the London Philharmonic or other groups like that.
Well, yes, we don't know. I hope we do get some opportunities. Incidentally, did you see, because we had, every summer here in London, we have the Proms.
Yeah,
That's
of course.
A big festival. Now, what they did, it was a bit strange what they did. They actually did have the Proms at the Albert Hall with the orchestra playing, but it was empty. They had no audience. And they had the orchestra, because they have a huge stage there, they had them all spaced out. And they put it on television. But you know what? It just made me feel depressed. I put a couple of concerts on, and I thought, this isn't what music is to me. I can't remember what I was listening to, a Sibelius piece or something. And it's beautiful music. And I think, do you know what? I'd rather actually go upstairs and put the record on my record player and sit and listen to the music, because to sit and look at a screen with all the players not even next to each other, they've got like 2 meters between each player, between each pair of violins, it's crazy. And I'm thinking, and there's nobody in the Albert Hall. So really, why not just listen to the recording? Because that's really nice. I mean, I'm glad they got the gig, but it's nice they got a gig and they got paid. But it was very, I don't know, unhappy. It made me feel a bit depressed.
Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna have to check that out. I haven't checked that out because we weren't. I feel like we weren't made to artistically experience things like this in that way. And a similar thing, City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. Actually, I was corresponding with one of the bassists there. They celebrated their 100th anniversary, I believe, with the last couple of weeks. Very similar, right? Empty hall. Here in the States, the Philadelphia Orchestra, before the pandemic, really shut things down. Some of these orchestras here in the States thought, we'll just play, but to no audience. And so they did this very creepy to me looking concert, playing and there's not one human in the hall. And actually the press here in the States picked up and we're just talking about the weirdness of that experience. And I know it just makes me depressed, actually. And I mean, I feel for all the musicians, and it's great that people are trying to do something, and I applaud their creativity and just trying, but it does make you depressed watching all these online concerts with all these disembodied disembodied heads. It just feels like this is not what we were. And so it's just great to hear that you're out there, even if it's not what you would normally be doing, that you're out there on the streets playing. And it's just cool. It's like the resilience of musicians, what you're doing. That's really cool.
Yes, well, I suppose we're all used to being. We have to be a bit innovative, don't we? We have to kind of come up with ideas, and we have to sort of sometimes get around things. So, yeah, hopefully there is a bit of resilience. I didn't feel very resilient a couple of months ago, but I have cheered up a little bit now.
Well, I've got this theory. Or talking to people, I come from a very standard kind of narrow classical tradition. Music school, music performance, orchestral, and so. But as I've gotten older and certainly went through this podcast, but just met more people, I feel like there's a little bit more resilience and creativity kind of built into the jazz musician. Or certainly anybody who, because nobody's got like a, hey, here, Alison, here's this very neat and tidy job. You're inventing your own career much more than folks that maybe went down the path I went down, at least in music school. So I think maybe people in jazz, certainly rock and other genres for sure, but you're just naturally you are really having to create your own career much more directly than maybe the path I went down.
I suppose so. I suppose we have to think on our feet a lot, because a lot of what we're doing is about responding in the moment. Even where we've got written music, it's not all written. There'll be written passages, and then there's going to be other things. And even within the written passages, for example, often for me, as a bass player, I've got a figure or a vamp, or there's a groove written, but really that's your kind of your basic shape, and then what happens afterwards will develop according to what everybody else is doing, and we do a lot of that. And I suppose then you kind of are used to a sort of, of course there's still a lot of structure, but you're also used to a kind of freedom. And we're all expressing music, whatever style of music we're playing, but there is, yes, perhaps you're right, and there's something about thinking in the moment and having to go for things. Maybe that helps. I don't know. I've never had. Yes, I haven't really had I didn't really have a traditional path at all. Sometimes I think I don't even know quite how I became a musician, but it's just that it was just there. Music was just there, and I kind of had to do it.
Yeah. I was reading an interview that you did a few years ago, I think, with a London publication. I can't remember. Just like many instruments, but bass guitar, right? And Jocko was kind of what. And then you started playing fretless for a bunch of years, and then came to the double bass. Yeah.
Yes. I kind of, yes. So the opposite of a classical player, of course. Early on, I did have a sort of basic classical education in that I learned piano. I did singing. I had singing lessons. The school I went to all the music was classical. But when I was growing up, it was the 60s, and I completely fell in love with. I loved a lot of classical music. I loved Beethoven, and I loved Mendelssohn, and all kinds of, some of the very kind of really classic and romantic music. I absolutely loved it, and I still do. But I got really drawn into, I loved this. I was in the Beatles fan club, I'm pleased to tell you. I loved a lot of the British rock music, and then I started listening to more to American music, and of course you had fantastic stuff coming over. And there's always been this very strong, British American thing happening, where the British bands like the Stones and the Beatles just were crazy. They loved rock and roll. So you listen more to that. They loved blues, and then Jimi Hendrix. And then I listened to more American stuff, Tamla Motown, soul, Aretha Franklin, all that really. And then I loved funk. I loved Sly and the Family Stone and the Meters and the Last Poets and all that stuff. And then disco. I really liked disco, and I loved dancing to disco. So there was all this. And I played guitar when I was young, and then I had a kind of period of, when I was a teenager, I couldn't find people to play with. It was terribly uncool to have girls in your band, I tell you, when I was a teenager. So, but then I was my late teens when I didn't start playing bass guitar until I was about 20, and And it was just because I met up with some people and they needed a bass player. And I had never thought about it, but I suddenly thought, that could be mine. That could be me. And I'd never thought of it before. And it was just perfect. Bass guitar. And then not long after I started playing, it was the year when we used to get this, there was a music paper in London called The Melody Maker. It was a really great newspaper. It was about all kinds of popular music, and it did cover quite a lot of jazz. There was an article one week about this fantastic American bass guitarist, Jaco Pastorius. I hadn't heard of him. And he had, in that year, this is 1976, he'd recorded Bright Size Life with Pat Metheny. He'd recorded... was it Hejira with Joni Mitchell? Anyway, it was one of her albums, yeah. He joined Weather Report, and he brought out, somebody organised it, and he brought out his own solo album. And they said this solo album was going to be coming out on a certain day. So I went down to the record shop on the day it came out, got the record, brought it home, put it on the record player. And I hadn't long been playing bass guitar, and I went, oh my God, it was just, wow. I mean, I liked a lot. We had some great bass players. I liked Paul McCartney, and Larry Graham was fantastic in Sly and the Family Stone. But I'd never heard anything like this. So that was it. And I had to play fretless. So it took a while, but I got a fretless. And I played fretless probably exclusively for about, 10 years maybe. And then by then I was really getting into jazz because Jaco and Pat Metheny and all these guys who I came into it through them, and then they were talking about Charlie Parker, and so then you go back and you're listening to all the stuff that influenced them. And I was playing a lot more jazz, and people were saying to me, you should be playing double bass. Why are you not playing double bass? That's the right instrument. And I kept digging my heels in going, no, Jaco Pastorius can swing on bass guitar. I don't need to play double bass. And then one day I realized that I was kind of hearing double bass. I felt like that's what I needed to be doing. I was trying to play the fretless bass guitar like it was a double bass, somehow the sound, what I wanted. And then a friend of mine, who's a great photographer and writer, she had a friend who was selling, an old West Indian guy who was selling his bass. And she said, do you know anybody who'd be interested? And I said, yes, me. So she brought the bass round. And of course, it's a big shift from bass guitar to double bass. Yeah. But I still have it. That's it in the background, actually.
That was the first and main bass. That's so cool. Wow. That shift is so interesting for people because so many people get, and it's funny though, bass guitar and double bass so similar yet so different in so many ways.
Yes.
I mean, yes. And it's like you can almost reach out and touch that double bass, the same strings, the same position, but it's just different enough. And the physical approach to the instruments are different enough that it's like it's a surprisingly complex thing, and even the balance of the instrument and everything that must be really interesting to come to after so many years on bass guitar, especially.
Yes, it was. I mean, it was a real challenge. I'm glad I think I was lucky in that. Fortunate she was because. The guy who I bought it from, he really had been a saxophone player. He'd come over. He'd come over. I think probably in the 30s, like a lot of guys did. He came to join the forces, be in the war. He was a sax player. But after the war, I think he wasn't getting enough gigs, and he thought I thought he played bass, and he thought he'd get more gigs. So he wasn't really a bass player, but he played it for a few years. Then I think he got married, and he had to get a proper job, and so that was kind of the end. And this bass had been standing in his apartment since early 1950s, and I bought it at the end of the 80s. So 50s, 60s. It had been just standing there for 30 or 40 years, just not being played. And what was interesting was that, when I got it, it had an action sort of like that, and it was in a bit of a state. It needed a bit of attention, and started playing it. And of course, it's hard to know. Of course, it takes a while before you start to be able to produce a sound from a double bass. But it seemed to me that the more I played it over the years, the sound got better and better. And I mean, hopefully a little bit of that was me. But I felt also the instrument, it wanted to be played. I don't think instruments like not being played.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that so? It's so weird. It's almost mystical, but there's it's this thing, or this organic thing that's been created. And yeah, I remember when I got the bass I currently have. I had this beautiful old Tyrolean bass from the late 19th century, and I just stopped playing it, and I started playing the other bass. And then I would go and I'd pick it up, and it had been like 2-3 months, and it wasn't vibrating. I don't understand it. And when I talk to luthiers, nobody can really explain why that happens scientifically that I've talked to, but you feel it. Yeah, you feel it. I feel it. There's something to that. They want to be played. This episode is brought to you by the Practisma Practice Journal. And here's author Susanna Klein on one of the biggest challenges about practicing.
Practice is so painfully incremental. That's just the nature of it. And so anytime we can kind of make it lighter, give it like a little jolt, or make it, that was a little better. Or we trick ourselves, like, when we're talking about doing rhythm practice, some of that is for the fingers. A lot of it's just for our head. Like, it gets you to, now I'm listening to these notes. Now I'm listening to these other notes more. Now I'm listening to these notes more. Yeah, you could just play the whole thing like god awfully slow, but boredom is terrible for the practice room.
I'm a big fan of this journal. I've gone through all 16 weeks myself on my own personal journey. It is so cool what Susanna's created. It's packed with research-based strategies to turn your ho-hum practice into extraordinary practice, and it really works. Learn more at Practisma.com, where you can download the introductory chapter of the journal for free. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. After several years of planning, I'm so happy that my course, Beginner's Classical Bass, is out on Discover Double Bass. This course is made up of 66, yes, that's a lot, video lessons which cover a wide range of topics on classical double bass, starting from taking your bass out of the case, which is very fun to film, and Jeff Chalmers of Discover Double Bass and I have a great blooper reel about that, and leading to different bow strokes such as staccato and portato. The topics also include posture, simple scales and arpeggios, left-hand technique, bowing technique, simple pieces which are fun to play, practice tips, and much more. You can learn more through the link in the show notes, or just visit discoverdouble-bass.com/Jason Heath.
Something about, it must be to do with the air moving and how the wood is resonating, the vibrations going through the wood. I don't know. It's amazing. I know it's a beautiful bass. I still really, really love it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so cool. Gary Carr, the wonderful classical bassist, I was talking to him years ago about what we're talking about here, and he had a very specific way of what he called breaking in an instrument, to get a new instrument vibrating. It's really interesting. It basically boiled down to playing double stops as loud as possible. I think I might be not getting that right, but it was really, really interesting. And anytime a new bass came into his life, he had this very specific routine of getting the wood going, and it's fascinating. Yeah, that organic nature of the double bass. It's really cool.
Maybe I'll try that when my hand's better. I might try that. Double stops as loud as I can. Yeah. Try that.
Maybe I'll check in with Gary to make sure I'm getting that right. But it's something
make sure you got it right. Yeah.
I'd love it. We have so many things to talk about. We'll have to do a round 2 for sure. But there's just people who composers. I just think it's so interesting how people write. They write, particularly the bass. For me, particularly the bass player experience of being a side person and then becoming a leader. And I mean, I don't even know where to start. But we could just start with how do you compose? I just think it's so interesting. Where do ideas? Are you recording into your phone? Are you sitting down at the piano? Are you playing the bass? How has that process evolved over the years?
There's two or three different approaches, but I would say the main thing for me, and this is in a way what makes it so scary for me, is because I don't know where anything comes from. It's not like a sort of exercise. It's nothing technical. What happens is, I think I've had some of my best ideas when I'm nowhere near an instrument. I'm out. Say I'm walking in the park, or I'm on the bus somewhere, or I'm walking along, and I I start singing something or humming something, or I hear something in my head, and it might be groove, it could be a rhythmic thing, it could be a melody, quite often a tune. Sometimes it's a bass groove. So I get my phone out, the little voice recorder, and I just record the idea. And then I might do a bit more on it just like that. I go, oh, but then it could do this, or this could be a B section, or, whatever. And then I go home, and then at home I'll work with, it's a mixture. I use the piano. I'm not a great player, but I see everything. When I think about shapes, so I see it all on the piano. So I might play the bass groove in, or the rhythm, and then I work with Sibelius and start to build up a bit of a score, But no, there's just something I was going to say there, and then I suddenly went blank. For example, I had one idea, in fact, off this album, August, there's a tune on it, a ballad called August, and I was in France on
Oops. Oh, I lost you for a second, but you're back. I think you're muted. Let's try. Let me see if I can
I've
there
unmuted.
We go. That's the beauty of not being live. I just edit that out. But we were just talking about the compositional process and I was going
to give you a couple of examples of things. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great. We're back.
Right. So one of the pieces, like a piece on here, I was in France on a holiday. I was actually feeling it was a very difficult time. My parents were both very elderly, and I knew that they were both we're going to lose them. I knew within, a few months, and we did. And I felt very, very sad, very full of grief about that. And then also a relationship that I'd been in for 10 years was clearly ending. And I had that feeling where you're in the most beautiful place, and yet you feel terrible inside. And it's an awful kind of contradiction almost, very painful, and but anyway, I was singing and I started hearing this idea, and so I walked down to a further place out onto a field, and I sang the idea into the phone, and then I thought of the next section and I sang it in, and then when I came back, it was like the piece was there. It was the whole piece. So all I had to do was find the chords to go with the melodies, and well, it turned into a tune that was, I suppose it was, it worked really nicely. The band played it beautifully. And another one, I was in Australia. This is on here. I was in Australia, and it was the first time I'd been to Australia. I'd been listening to some of the kind of traditional music. I'd heard didgeridoos playing, and I was also out walking in the bush quite a lot. And I don't know if you've been to Australia, but
back in November I was there. It was great experience.
Then, I mean, and somebody from England too, the size of it, the immensity of the skies, those beautiful orange, all that orange earth, and the birds. It's just, and the sounds of the birds and the animals. It's loud, and it's Anyway, I was listening to all that and out on a bushwalk, and I kind of got this idea for a kind of something. I started sort of hearing the kind of rhythm, and I thought, we could almost reproduce the sound of the didgeridoo. And I asked Deirdre, who plays the guitar in my band, I said, could you, when I came back, I got an idea for a rhythm, and I sang it into my phone as I was on this bushwalk, kind of going, ning-a-nong, 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 ning-a, like that. And then a kind of idea for a rhythm. And when I got home, I said to her, do you think you could do something that sounds like a didgeridoo? And I said, I think I could. And she just does it with her pick, but somehow she manages to get all those kind of funny harmonic-y things coming out, just the way she's playing it. And then I carried on, and I wrote the rest of the piece. And so it's called Crow Jingle on Bushwalk, because we were having a bushwalk in a place called Crow Jingle, and just tried to capture a bit of that feel. Mm-hmm. And I'd recorded some of the bird sounds while we were there. So we just stuck a little bit of it on the front of the track and stuff, just for the atmosphere, you know.
Wow.
But I mean, so I think most of it, I think a lot of my best ideas don't come. I mean, I work on the pieces. I spend a lot of time sitting working, you know, sometimes with my bass or with the piano chords or on Sibelius and putting it all together. But I'm not sure where it comes from. And so in a way, sometimes that makes me frightened, because suppose I don't think of anything again.
Sure, right,
you know
right.
What I mean?
Right. Oh yeah, no, completely.
It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's scary, but the cool thing is then the idea comes when you least expect it, and it sounds like a lot of them come when you're out and about. And I'm just curious, because I'm not much of a composer at all, and my hard drive is littered with like one bar ideas that never go anywhere. But what did you do before the advent of phones? Because it sounds like you like to capture things in audio. Did you used to carry around a tape recorder? And I know your solo albums came out since there have been phones, so maybe you weren't capturing them in that idea. But did you feel the urge to capture ideas back before we had these devices?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, remember, because you see, I was a big fan of the Walkman. We had a Walkman record. I had a professional Walkman, which was a recording one, and that would have been in the 80s. I'm trying to think, when did I start writing? I probably started writing in the very early 80s.
Okay.
And I would think, but it's hard for me to recall, but I'm pretty sure I would have recorded an idea, probably singing into a Walkman. And I think that's been very important, because I cannot tell you how many ideas I have lost because I didn't record them.
Yeah.
You know, when you have that wonderful idea, sometimes at night, or you're asleep and you wake up and you have a great idea and think, I'll remember that in the morning. No, you don't. That's it.
Yep.
They're gone, aren't they? They're just fleeting.
Yeah, no, I'm curious. Okay, so you've been doing that for a while. I mean, I remember back, I used to have mini cassette recorders, and then I got my mini disc, if you remember that era in the 90s.
Yes, a mini disc. I had a mini disc.
Yeah, and
we had a DAT machine.
Yeah, right.
We had DAT.
Yeah.
We had one of those. It was it was a bit big and clunky, but it was a portable one, and you could record. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, I think all that's been really important to me. When I was young, we didn't have, growing up, even though we had a lot of music in the house, we didn't have any of those kind of recording things. I mean, some people had reel-to-reels, but we didn't have anything like that. But I think that's made a very big difference. And phones are amazing for that, aren't they?
Yeah, it's so much easier
the whole time.
Yeah. Well, I think back to music school for me, which was starting in the early 90s for me, and I used to carry this duffel bag of gear around. I used to carry it was probably some sort of cassette recorder at that time, and I had like a camcorder and all these extension cords, and now this one device, you know, I call it the best and worst thing that's ever happened to my life.
but you're dead right.
Yeah, but the positives, I mean, it's just so amazing how much just easier it is to capture things. If you need to capture some video, certainly capture some audio, like we're talking about, get it into the computer. And what I'd love to know, because I think it's so interesting, the state of preparedness at which somebody walks into the studio. You know, I'm chatting with the bassist Derek Hodge in the coming weeks, who has released several. He's got several albums out on Blue Note, and he was talking about his latest album intentionally not preparing the band. Maybe was a way to say it. He had these ideas, and just in the studio, he played a little thing on the piano, and then everybody kind of ran with that idea, and it was take one or take two. They were done. And then they worked on it after, but and then obviously people rehearse for weeks or months and come in, and I'd love to know, because it seems like there are so many different approaches. Like, how have you approached? And it sounds like you've had different approaches, because the first album was live, but maybe how have you approached the whole preparation process and then actually in the recording studio for your albums?
Well, I suppose we're probably somewhere in the middle of those two things, because say with this last album, with short stories, and probably with the one before, Magic Life, I decided I knew the studio I wanted to use. It's a very nice studio. It's not too far away from us in North London. It's called Livingston, and they recorded Oh gosh, I've now had a blank about the name. Going back a while, that it was a Latin, it was Cuban, American guitarist brought over all those old Cuban musicians.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm blanking too. People listening are going to be shouting out the answer. It's okay.
It's here somewhere. I can. Anyway, I can't remember it now. I've had a terrible blank. It happens. It happens more as you get older, I find. But anyway. Buena Vista.
Oh,
the
of
Buena
course,
Vista
of course.
Social Club.
Oh, I feel like I've fooled. There's actually a Buena Vista Social Club here in San Francisco. I walk by every day. I should have remembered that.
Really?
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fantastic.
Not the same one, obviously, but okay.
Well, they recorded that in that album. They recorded that album in Studio One in Livingston, and I'm not saying that was the reason I went there. I love the studio, and it's I find it a very sympathetic place. I always use the same engineer, and he does all the mixing and stuff as well. So for me, you see, it's expensive. I wanted to have. I think we had 4 days this time, so it's a big outlay for us. They have very good piano there as well, which of course is essential because I have a quintet with a piano. We had, I think, in the run up to the album recording, I'd probably written, maybe there'd been a year or 18 months. I'd probably written a couple of pieces early on, and then a few more, and then we were playing them in because we were touring and doing gigs and whatnot. So some of them were being played in, but probably only half of it had been played, and we'd worked on, rehearsed and played these tunes. And I wanted the other of the band, they're all really good writers as well as being players. And on the second album, piano player Steve Lodder, he wrote a piece, and Diane McLaughlin, who plays saxophone, she also wrote a piece for that. And I said to them, the band again, look, would you like to contribute a piece to the album? That'd be really nice. And those two, and also Deirdre, who plays the guitar, they all contributed a piece. So we had some new pieces. I wrote a couple more shortly before the recordings. So we had some pieces, I'd say half the album we had played a fair bit, and the pieces were bedded in a bit, and we developed, because they always change as you're playing at gigs and stuff. But we had some newer ones. So it was a mixture of some pieces being fairly well prepared. And I would say before the studio dates, we probably got together for a couple of good rehearsals, and we did a gig just before we recorded as a kind of tryout for all the tunes before we went into the studio. And that was really helpful, because that can show up things where some things need to be more developed. Mm-hmm. So I would say it's kind of halfway in between, because a lot of work and preparation got into it, but things were not fixed, and some things were changed in the studio. We changed some sections, we, stretched out some bits, we changed some endings, maybe some of the improvisation sections changed. And so it was a kind of mixture. It'd be wonderful if you had more money, you could book more studio time, and then you could really, couldn't you? You could really develop.
It's tough though, because pressure's on, because I know that's a considerable financial outlay in any sort of studio of that caliber. So it's preparing makes sense that way. I just think it's really interesting how I'm always fascinated. I've done my fair share of world travel, but I'm just always so interested by what I guess we could just say the scene is like in other parts of the globe. I was, like I mentioned, I was in Australia this fall. I was in Melbourne. Talking with a bassist who named Ben Hanlon, who both plays in the Melbourne Symphony, but also is really active as a jazz bassist. And he was just sharing with me how much is going on in Melbourne, and certainly in Sydney too. And it made me think, my goodness, there is the jazz scene in here in San Francisco, or in a lot of. I used to live in Chicago here in the States. We've got a couple clubs that are happening, a few independent venues, and it just feels like it's this sort of. I don't want to be depressing, but it feels like the scene is shrinking, and especially here in San Francisco, as the tech world and Silicon Valley is sort of, it feels like but it seems like I'd love to just know, like, and you've been working for years. What's the scene like maybe in London and the UK? Like, how's it changed? I mean, just yes. You've obviously got a thriving career, but I just love to know your perspective on that?
It's funny because there's been some downturns, but there's also been some upswings. So, I mean, when I was first in the 80s, I was quite busy. That was when I'd been playing bass guitar for quite a while. I didn't start playing double bass till the very end of maybe 89, 90. So I was playing bass guitar. There were many, many gigs. There was a lot of live venues and lots of gigs. I was in London, but I did a lot of touring. We toured all over Europe. We toured in the Middle East. We came to the States. We did loads of stuff, and there was a lot happening. And then there was during, I suppose, maybe not so much the 90s, but maybe as it kind of later in the 90s into sort of the turn of the century and all that, things, the live scene seemed to shrink. A lot of the places, I mean, if I walk around my neighborhood broadly, locally, a few miles around, I can see a lot of places that were live music venues, and they're not now. I think the problem was when DJs started to become a big thing, and a lot of venues would go, well, all we need is one person, much cheaper, and we can, entertain all these people. So you'd have all these places that stopped having live music. So it felt like things had shrunk a lot. However, at the same time, in the last 10, 15 years, the jazz scene seems to have kind of had a real old upsurge here. So, and what we have got, I think we were relatively late in having jazz at the conservatoires. When I was young, there were no jazz or popular music courses at all. You could only study classical. And then over a period of time, gradually, there's been more and more courses. There's a lot of courses in, other stuff like producing and the different styles of popular music. But the jazz courses, we've got a number of really good, excellent jazz conservatoires in London and in other cities. And over the last few years, they have produced a lot of new players. And what we've also had, I think, is there's been more diversity in the student population coming out. So you have many more women, and you have much more diverse in terms of culture or colour. Used to be very much a sort of white, young white men sort of thing.
Sure.
And it's now much more mixed, many more women, a mixture of black and white, really. So that's been really good. And then, of course, some of these younger people coming out of the conservatoires they're mixing in their, stuff like hip hop and the kind of stuff that they've grown up with, their own take on music, or some of them who maybe have roots in Africa, the Caribbean, mixing in their own music with that. So you've got styles of music that are appealing to quite a broad populace, and jazz has become more popular.
Yeah.
So I know I'm specifically talking about jazz here, and that's because I know more about that. And I think that may well also be happening across Europe. I mean, we toured with my band, we toured in Germany a couple of years ago. I used to tour a lot. In the 80s, we toured in Germany a lot. And I got used to, German audiences, which we always find incredibly open and really love live music. To me, it felt like that again when we were there 2 years ago. Although I think they would probably say, oh, God, they've lost a lot of venues and things are not as they were. And there isn't the money as there was.
Right.
So it's kind of, there's been some downturns and some things have kind of shrunk. And yet there's been other things that have emerged. And so there are some positive things, I think.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to hear your perspective, and and I've noticed, especially when I was living in Chicago, I was teaching at one of the universities, conservatories in Chicago, and working with jazz students, but teaching them classical lessons, which is kind of an old model, but that's what I was doing, and it was so interesting to see the work they were doing, and it's just like what you were saying. It was much more of a blend of different music, world music, and then a lot of hip hop pop melded with jazz, and it was amazing to see how many, though maybe some of there weren't as many of the kind of classic institutional clubs that there had been for years and years. There were new places popping up that maybe they were a bar, but they had live music, maybe many nights a week. And we're seeing that here in San Francisco. At this place, I'm probably just have a weird perspective because of this strange city I live in and the financial pressures of a place like this, though it's true in other parts of the world. I'd love to know, because you've traveled a lot, played a lot of different places. Do you have any favorite audiences, like you were mentioning? I love going to Germany and playing, especially orchestral music. I think, wow. I remember playing Mahler's Third Symphony in Japan in the summer outdoors, and that symphony is already I think his longest symphony. You guys sweating buckets, but just the Japanese audiences I thought were. Do you have any favorite places you've been, just in terms of the reception of the music you do? There are probably a lot, but
well, if I just try and imagine some scenarios, a couple of gigs. When I was in a group called the Guest Stars in the 80s, and it was all women, and it was kind of an sort of extraordinary mixture of jazz and Latin and Afro jazz and I don't know, all of that, and a bit improvised, a bit free. And we did a tour of the Middle East, and that was kind of extraordinary because a group of women touring in the Middle East, you can imagine it was kind of wow, you know. We did a gig in Egypt, in Alexandria. The tour it was through the British Council. So, you know, the British Council is about exporting British culture to other countries. So they put us on in Alexandria. They put us in an old opera house. It was the most beautiful place. It was a big, you know, kind of domed opera house. And I think it maybe was free. Anyway, we were there in the afternoon and we did our sound check, and we didn't really, you know, you don't know what to expect. And then the audience arrived and the place was rammed, completely rammed. And they were so enthusiastic. They just loved it. And at the end, they all stood up. The whole of this huge auditorium stood up and they were all clapping. And I had my camera and I thought, I have to take a picture of this audience. So I just took a picture of this audience, all these Egyptians. So that was amazing. On that same tour, we played in a university, Suez Canal University. We had to play during the daytime, and the students, they were young men and young women, and they kind of, the women there were wearing not hijabs or anything, or niqabs, but they had veils, you know, over their hair and stuff. Quite conservative, but they were so excited, and there was no alcohol, of course, and it was a daytime thing, but they were all excited afterwards, and they wanted to talk to us, and they were just wonderful. And another fantastic, an outdoor, because you mentioned outdoor. Oh God, there's something about outdoors. It would be, I'm just trying to think when it was, the very end of the 90s, the guitarist of my band, Deirdre Cartwright, she was leading her own groups during that period. That's before I started mine. And we went to play at a festival in Mexico City. And it was a festival, it was curious, it was a festival of European jazz. And they had a group from different countries. So we were representing with the UK, I guess. We played this really, really lovely concert. And it was the last day when all the bands played. And the trio that were representing Sweden was Esbjörn Svensson's trio. When we came back, it was a very big place. And there was these crowds and crowds of people all queuing up. And we thought, oh, there must be another event on. They must be queuing up for the cinema. There must be a film on, or there must be something. But no, they weren't. They were queuing up to come to our gig, which was just amazing. And a lot of very, very young people. And again, incredibly responsive and enthusiastic. And it just makes you think we have to get out and play to different people. Because there are people there who want to have that live music experience, don't they? Yeah. They want to hear new music. And there are people all over the world who are incredibly open and receptive.
Yeah.
And we're really fortunate to be able to do that, I think. To have those experiences, amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And then it's so tough when it's all put on pause for an indefinite amount of time. You know, I can't, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, things I'm not going to take for granted. Travel. How I wouldn't even think twice about hopping on a plane and going to Australia, or I was actually in Leeds right before the pandemic.
Gosh.
Yeah. And I feel like such a fool for not extending that trip out and exploring and spending time in London. I had an event before and an event after, and Leeds to San Francisco is a long flight. So, and it was the cheapest European flight I got in ages. And I thought, like, why is this so cheap? And then I thought, oh, Leeds in January, probably not a major tourist destination. So.
Probably not.
but I can't. How I'll not take that sort of travel for granted. What a cool experience that must have been to travel the Middle East like that, and everything you've done.
That's amazing.
Alison, let's definitely do a round two. Whenever you've got the doors open, anything you've got coming up that, or just if our paths cross in person in the near future, which I hope they will, because I love the work you're doing. You deserve all the accolades you've gotten, and I have people back multiple times, and it's been great to hang out. I will link up to everything we talked about, link up to the website, which is beautifully designed, by the way. Congratulations. It's just
Thank you.
Represents your work so well, and the album and all your albums. And is there anywhere, social media, is there anywhere else you want me to send people? Or
well, with my website, which is AlisonRayner.com, there is a page there to the album, to link to all the recordings. So if anybody's interested, and we've got them on. I've got a distributor, so they can be bought through the distributor, but they're on Amazon and they're on Bandcamp, which of course is very nice because you kind of set that up yourself.
Yep.
They're on Bandcamp and they're on something else, iTunes or something. And I have put all my stuff on Spotify. I'm never sure what the best thing to do is, but my feeling overall is I'd rather people hear it than don't. So hopefully that's good.
Yeah.
So I think probably the website, and I mean, I've got a Facebook page, but I haven't put much on it lately because there's been nothing happening the last 6 months. But it's facebook.com, and then it's /Alison Rayner, ALISONRAYNER .ARQ, which is ARQ. So that's my Facebook page. But the website, I think, that has probably as up to date as it can be at the moment. Hopefully there'll be something new to put on there soon.
Yeah, and when things to put on there occur, I look forward to following along with what you're up to. Anything you got coming up? We have a weekly newsletter that we are always talking about what's going on in the bass world. So anything you want to get the word out about, pass it along. Any new project you want to hop on and do this, we can always do it over Zoom. In person is always more fun, though more challenging, certainly during a pandemic. But let's please keep in touch.
I will do. And thank you so much for including me in this. I really appreciate it. And it's been really nice meeting you. And thank you so much for the opportunity, because it's very nice to sit and talk to another bass player and talk about music. And it makes me feel a bit like, there's more going on, isn't there? We've got this, which is really nice. It's really nice, though. Thank you.
Alison, thank you so much. Folks, AlisonRayner.com is her website. She's up to so many cool things, and it's so amazing to me how much more there is for me to learn, how many more people there are for me to connect with, like Alison, how this podcast, I could do one of these every single day of the week and talk to somebody new and never run out of people. And it humbles me every time I realize that. I have 27 minutes until my student I was going to say arrives, but there are no arrivals at the moment because it's a pandemic. So until I have to hop on Zoom. So I need to be brief with this outro. If you want to get in touch with me, feedback at contrabassconversations.com. is the email, and I'd love to hear from you, or just go to our website, contrabassconversations.com. If you're not on our email list, go to the website, join up there. We've got thousands of bassists that we connect with every single week, and beyond the podcast, we talk about the podcast a little bit, many more things. And so many people help me to put this together. The team is amazing that works on these shows. They are Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, Krista Copper, and Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Award-winning basses. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. The theme music is by Eric Hochberg, me jamming out with him in the mid-2000s. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.